Thanks very much, Clive. Hopefully, I've adapted this quite a bit after I saw who was going to be in the room, not least of which I'm very grateful to Matt for covering the political situation so eloquently at the beginning, so I don't need to talk about it at all. I think we all know where we are. If you've been in the solar space for more than 5 minutes, you've been on a roller coaster for the last 4 years in the UK. If you're only following it because of FITs or ROCs, or CFDs or EMR or whatever the current catchword is going on in policy at the moment, then you are getting a really sore head. What I'm going to do is focus on some of the market dynamics that we've seen over the last few years, but also some forecasts going into the next couple of quarters. I'm quite privileged that I've got a sizable amount of data from our recent event, which Matt mentioned, Solar Energy UK. If you did come up to Birmingham for that exhibition, that's also one of mine. So what am I going to cover tonight? So well, you'll hear a little bit about who I am, not too much. About solar becoming a reality, because this is something I'm very passionate about, and anytime I get up in front of anybody, more than 2 people, or perhaps even just yourself, if you're unlucky later on, I will tell you all about why solar is the way we should be going globally in the energy mix, and more importantly, we'll then look at how that's affecting the UK market, the size of the market, how it's developed, but also more importantly, where we believe it's going over the next couple of quarters and into the future. So my business is quite a myriad one. We specialize in B2B, marketing and media for the solar industry globally. Most of my business is overseas. We employ 32 people around the world, including a team in China, who are based out there covering the Chinese market, which is incredibly challenging, but very worthwhile at the moment. We cover everything in the supply chain from raw materials all the way through to project deployment and finance. Just a quick slide. This is the only slide I used last time. I'm just showing you again because it's really important that I think people need to understand why is solar so imperative. Why does the International Energy Agency come out and say that by 2050, solar will be the most prevalent renewable technology deployed by 2050? The main reason, and the most fundamental reason, which no amount of government policy or spin doctoring can change, is that in terms of available resource of energy, the sun is the best source of that energy now and in the future. And it's about how we harness that. And if we look at the technology itself, we can practically harness enough of that energy to more than quadruple our current energy demand globally. It's using today's technology. Now, there are other issues for deployment, and like I said, we're not going to go into the policy side. But I do like people to see this first, to understand what the underlying opportunity is there in the solar space. So solar becoming mainstream, this really is a dream that's becoming a reality now. If anybody read the Shell New Lens report, which came out a few weeks ago, you will see this wonderful infographic here on the left, which shows that by 2100, according to Shell's ocean scenario, solar will account for 37.7% of the world's energy generation. Shell is a company that 5 years sold out of the solar space. They did have quite a lot of technology activity in solar. They got out. There's a new CEO in place now. We can only hope that that new CEO might even go back in. Who knows? People do like to retread old ground. Actually, if you read the report in detail, you realize this is really a justification for how much gas is going to be required over the next 50 years, if you read the fine print. But the headline figure there really does help grab the public attention. And that's something that's starting to drive solar into the mainstream. Solar isn't a niche technology anymore. It is a well-established technology. It's been around for 60, 70 years, deployed in the field. We all use it every day, whether we know it or not. I'm not talking about your sharp calculator when you're in high school. I'm talking about your mobile phones. All of our mobile phone signals, our communication satellites, have all been powered by solar for more than 20 years. And when you start to bring that back to the consumer, whether it's a business, whether it's a farmer, whether it's someone in their home, they start to realize how technologically safe and sound an investment solar energy really is. I imagine the slides, as usual, will be available afterwards. So if I do skip over anything in here, you can either pick it up in a question later on or come and lampoon me during some of the networking. These are just some of the reasons why solar is very much a safe investment. One thing I think it's worthwhile pointing out, 6 points down there, as volumes are rising, prices are falling. Yes, basic economics, go to university, you'll learn that. What's really interesting in the solar space is that prices have fallen on the core components by 80% over 3 years. Now, what renewable technology, let alone mainstream generator, can say the same? None of them. In fact, some of them, their prices have plateaued completely, or they may even go up a little bit. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about technology from Loughborough later on There's a lot of exciting stuff in the pipeline. We just saw Yingli, one of the largest solar module manufacturers in the world. You might know them because they do sponsor the Football World Cup. That's how big this industry is getting. Just launched their technology roadmap yesterday, mapping out cell efficiencies for the next 12 years in production. And it really is exciting stuff. Market size in the UK. So where have we come from? Well, it's pretty easy to have triple-digit growth when you've got a very low base. So back before the feed-in tariff, April 2010, we're looking at about, no one really knows for sure, but about 26 megawatts installed in the UK. Not a lot. Particularly when you look at the German market, at that point, was around about the cumulative 22 to 24 gigawatt mark. So yes, we've had tremendous growth in the last 3 years, but really in terms of what was happening in other markets like Germany, we were way behind. So 26 megawatts, now we're looking at almost 2.5 gigawatts. In fact, it's over that now. This slide's a couple of months old. 2.5 gigawatts cumulatively installed in the UK now. Now, who would have thought that a northern latitude country like the UK could ever deliver that amount of solar power on the grid? If you break it down, you're looking about 1.9 gigawatts of small or less than 50 kilowatt projects, and about 0.6 gigawatt at the time of large, generally large buildings and solar parks. So it's the commercial and the ground mount segment. We all know about the government support in this room, but what's really been driving this, and I'll get onto that on the next slide, not this one, is the RO and how that's become effective, which goes back to that point I highlighted before about price reductions. Absolutely critical when we're looking at deployment of this technology. Looking at the residential market size, I've borrowed a couple of graphs because they do such a good job with them from MPD Solar Buzz. Anyone who doesn't know who they are, check them out. They're part of a much wider research group globally. They've been covering the UK market and do a very, very credible job of it. If we look at the residential market size first, and I'm not going to dwell on the residential market because I feel like most of the people in this room are probably looking at large scale or ground mount. You can see where we had the FITs go uncontrollably in that boom in 2011-12 period. You can see what was happening quarter by quarter. And as we start to look at what's happening now, we're in this FIT reset period, the yellow bar here, and we've now started to see a much stronger, more stable level of deployment occurring at the domestic sector. It's quite a robust sector. It's not as affected by price rises in components or in labour or in finance because the returns are still quite attractive for an end user at that level. This is a debt graph, which we've doctored somewhat, just to give you an idea of what the peaks and troughs were and how it came about. Again, you're probably very familiar with this, and those of you involved in funds may have been involved in the leasing part of the market, which was really driving. If you look at the large, just as we went to 21p, the 43p market, the 21p market were very much driven by the leasing, the roof leasing programs that were happening, which were funded by city investors primarily. 12 months ago, if we were having this presentation, we would have thought, large-scale market. There wasn't a lot publicly available, but there was an awful lot of work going on behind the scenes. And I'm sure some of you in this room, whether you're based on the legal side or the project developer side or the finance side, were just starting to get interested again. And the reason you were getting interested again is because the renewable obligation, and ROCs in particular, became interesting for large-scale ground mount projects. And the reason for that's very simple. The feed-in tariff declined dramatically at the large scale, quite famously in fact, and then all of a sudden, over the course of about 12 to 18 months, prices reduced by almost 80% for solar components. So once again, all of these investors, all the developers, all of the lawyers got involved again because they could see there was a market once more with the renewable obligation. And that is what's driving the large-scale market right now. Okay, and that's really important. Most important, of course, is the fact that it's a known and it's a stable, or certainly perceived to be quite stable, depending on what may or may not happen after the election next year. ROCs are seen to be very, very stable because they have been underpinning all renewable deployment, in particular onshore wind, for the last 8 years. Large-scale market size. If we look at the pipeline, what's coming online, it's very, very robust. As Matt said, it's quite buoyant. You know, his teams are working on 5 deals in the next 5 days. I'm sure that same scenario is being played out around various offices around the city as we sit here tonight. Talking to some of the developers that we're very close to, we're certainly aware of very strong pipelines. What I'm really fascinated about is less the pipeline now in the next 6 months. Okay, that is interesting. We will see quite a lot deployed before the rock digression. What I'm really interested in is what's happening after April next year. And talking to developers 2-3 weeks ago at Solar Energy UK, what was really clear is that those pipelines are continuing to grow, even at 1.4 rocks. And I think that's really important for us because the first time as an industry, we can start to look beyond the next 6-month wave. We can start to plan ahead. We can start to look towards a much more stable market dynamic going into 2014 and indeed into 2015. Of course, after 2015, and I hope I'll have time to show you a quick slide in a minute, you're going to see the prices come down even further in 2015 because that's when the AD legislation will allow the Chinese to sell at market value again as opposed to the artificial price that's being imposed upon them right now. So looking at a forecast, so using the pipeline before, we look forward towards a forecast. Now, what's really interesting is there's lots of different numbers. At the end of the day, it's very difficult to get accurate deployment numbers for many, many, many months after something's been deployed and connected to the grid because Ofgem's it's quite slow. It's a bureaucracy. It takes a while to understand what's exactly being connected. So this is the position that we think we are at. This has to be stressed. But looking at the pipeline, what should get in before April next year, before the rock digression, we're looking at a cumulative market of around about 4 gigawatts, which is, again, really exciting and keeps us really firmly in that window to hit the 20 gigawatt target for 2020, which is very important for government. So they're seeing that although the domestic and commercial sectors have really failed to achieve what they should have achieved this year, the large-scale sector has really come in using the ROC subsidy to overcompensate. So looking at some market projections for 2013, so to the end of this calendar year, and it is quite difficult. Whenever you're looking at a market projection, you've got to look at when is it till? Is it till the FIT year? Is it till the ROC year? Is it till a certain digression point? Is it quarter? Is it calendar year? This is a calendar year projection. Looking at the utility segment, we're looking about 1 to 1.5 gigawatts, we believe, over the course of the year. There are some issues, which I've listed in the variables there. You know, there's a theoretical 15 gigawatt cap. Okay, you might say, well, with 4 gigawatts, we're nowhere near 15 gigawatts yet. But if we keep deploying and accelerating deployment at the rate we're going to be bumping up against certain grid connection issues over the next 3-4 years. And it's going to happen in some areas much sooner. In fact, it's already happening in some areas, particularly in the southwest, where we're at the very end of any grid infrastructure, which needs upgrading in order to take more capacity. The commercial segment, which has really, really underperformed this year, and largely that's because the IRRs on that segment of the FIT, they're not attractive enough. Unless you've got access to a very, very good counterparty, it's very difficult to get finance at the right level in order to execute commercial rooftops, which is a real shame because commercial rooftops are probably probably the biggest opportunity in the UK in the long term. The residential segment, it's stable, but it's certainly not growing at the sort of rate we might like to see. It's ticking over at sort of the 8 to 10 megawatt mark per week, which is well within DEC's threshold for the year, well within their budget threshold. So they are discussing at the moment, I said I wouldn't talk about politics, but they are discussing changing some of the onerous requirements on the residential market. So we have some challenges. And for those of you, I don't read the Daily Mail. I know a lot about the Daily Mail because they like to slag off solar an awful lot. And we try to do our best to bust myths when we see things in mainstream press. A number of months ago, there was a big story in the Daily Mail, in Idle blighted by 18,000 solar panels, seen from the sky, the reality of alternative energy. You know, you could just imagine the music cueing, the dun 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 coming in the background as you read it. And of course, this is one of our biggest challenges, is that this park, which you're seeing on the screen here, is a 5 megawatt solar park. It takes up 30 acres, okay? The oil refinery, which you can see in the back right-hand corner, takes up 3,250 acres. Now, the only way to see this solar park, because actually there's no roads around it, it's all screened by hedges from the ground level, is from a helicopter. And this is one of the challenges that we have. Even though the public is there's a strong public approval rating for solar, 86% is higher than any other technology. This is DEC's poll, it's a government poll. We still have this problem with and it's going to happen. It's happened in Germany. It's happening in the US as we speak. There's a very big pushback from the centralized energy generators who do not have a vested interest in seeing solar and other technologies take root. Now, that's not to say that they're all big, bad, the big six are all big and bad, because there are actually some really good groups within those companies that are doing a lot to promote solar. But overall, in terms of what they're doing, how they're presenting it to the public, it's very difficult. This is one of our biggest challenges as an industry. Now, that concludes the presentation. But what I did have is, because this only broke very recently, my team have been working on an infographic about nuclear and solar, and I thought you might be interested in it. And we've broken it down because it's not easy to fit into a PowerPoint slide. It'll be so small you need a magnifying glass to read it, and you can look at it in more detail online or in the presentations. But we've tried to put together some of the information that's batting around about the different technologies. And one of the things I think that's really interesting is this 2018 point where, the Solar Trade Association, which is one of the associations that represent solar in the UK, is looking at solar being able to be delivered at £91 a megawatt hour, which is significantly, it is below the current strike price being discussed around the new nuclear plant, quite famously. And as you can see, obviously, I would say this because I want solar to succeed, and obviously I'm aware there are issues between dispatchable and non-dispatchable power. However, personally, I would like to see a much greater mix of energy sources within the UK and, of course, globally. And my fear is that by focusing so heavily on nuclear, on gas, and I'm not saying we don't need these things, I think we do, we really run the risk of changing all these policies that are going to lock us into these very long-term contracts for the next 45 years, 35 years past the date when that nuclear plant comes live, and that really does concern me. So the message for government, the message for people out there working in the sector as well, is to try and put as much pressure, I think, on local MPs, on anyone that you have connections with in the government, to make sure they're aware of figures like this. And yes, this is from a trade body, but there are other figures out there which prove that even if you don't believe in solar, whether it's onshore wind, they will be able to deliver energy cheaper or at the price of nuclear. And this is the rest of the infographic, and it goes through there. A figure that doesn't get talked about much in the press, and I think it should, is that it's very easy to get this information, mind you. 69% of DEC's annual budget currently goes to nuclear waste disposal. I don't know if any of you knew that. I certainly am keenly aware of that. And this is all there in DEC's own accounts. And this is just for the current nuclear deployment. So when people start talking about green levies and FITs and ECO and ROCs and all the rest of it, we're currently spending 70% of our Department of Energy and Climate Change's budget on nuclear waste disposal. Bear in mind the price for the new nuclear plant doesn't include any money for disposal. That's all going to come back to the taxpayer. It's not factored into the figures. Again, I'm not bashing nuclear. I think nuclear is a good technology, but I just want everyone to be aware of the facts. So that's all from me, and I hope you learned something, and if there's anything I can expand upon for you, if you have any more detailed needs or information, please contact me, follow me on Twitter if you'd like to hear about what's going on @SolarChampion, and please subscribe to our newsletters to stay in touch with what's happening in the sector, both here and overseas. Thanks very much.